What's going on, everybody? This is Chris Crazy House, and I'm back with some Chris Crazy commentary. I wanted to talk a little bit about the passing of John Romita Sr. I know that there have actually been a lot, and I mean a lot, of very amazing comic book artists who have been passing away over the last 2 years or so. And it's been a real shame because these are not just any comic book artists, but comic book artists who defined the genre. I'm talking about some of the most influential comic book artists you could ever think of have been passing away recently, and John Romita Sr. was one of them. But we've lost everyone from Neil Adams to George Perez. And now with John Romita Sr., it's a shame to see that, when you have titans of the industry starting to pass away now, and it seems to have been coming one after another. And it's a shame to see that, but I will say that they all left an amazing legacy with the work that they had done and the things that they had accomplished in their industry. As far as John Romita Sr. goes, for those who don't know who he was, John Romita Sr. was a comic book artist at Marvel, and he defined, probably the biggest thing that he defined was Spider-Man for a number of years. Okay, so Spider-Man was created and crafted by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko back in, I believe, the mid-60s. And when Steve Ditko left as the regular artist, they had a few artists in between, but then John Romita jumped on it afterwards. And when I say John Romita became the defining Spider-Man artist, because Spider-Man was popular before with Steve Ditko, but it really went into the stratosphere when John Romita took over Spider-Man. And his Spider-Man kind of became the template for how Spider-Man was done from then on. You see what I mean? Like his version of how Spider-Man was drawn, that became kind of the standard, and to the point where it became like the logo for Marvel for the longest time. And anytime you saw any type of advertisement, anytime you saw any type of toy, anytime you saw any type of merchandise with Spider-Man on it, it was John Romita's version of Spider-Man that was there. Even when I was a child in the 80s, that version of Spider-Man was still around. Okay, even when you looked at some of the cartoons, it was based off of John Romita's version of Spider-Man, even though he had moved on from being the artist a long time ago, right? So he's the one that was kind of like the standard for art. Or even if someone did something different, like when McFarlane came along or Eric Larson came along, what they were always saying is they were doing something different than John Romita, because either you were trying to copy him and do exactly what he did and go back to that type of look, or you were trying to move away from it as far as possible. So he was the standard of what Spider-Man art became. And he was just a talented artist in and of himself. You could see his enthusiasm for the art form in his work with Spider-Man, but I really enjoyed going back before that. If you find his artwork from Daredevil, I thought he did a great job on Daredevil too, when the regular artist for Daredevil left and he was on that for a little bit. I think that's kind of like what got him the Spider-Man job. If you go see his work on Daredevil, and I thought he did a great job with that. And I think what really defined his work was it was almost kind of like a classic style, but he was a very prolific comic book artist. Like he worked on romance comics and stuff like that. So he put a lot of that into his superhero work as well. And I think that helped to define his style and why it became such a classic look. And when I look at his Spider-Man stuff, what it makes me think of is his Spider-Man wasn't just good. Like I enjoyed the way he drew Spider-Man and Peter Parker, but I thought how he really shined was the supporting cast as well. Like the way he drew them and added them into the story. Because the Spider-Man universe wasn't just about Spider-Man and the villains. It was the supporting cast is what made it. Spider-Man's friends like Flash Thompson and Harry Osborn, Spider-Man, like the adults in his life, like his Aunt May and J. Jonah Jameson and Robbie Robinson, the women in his life like Mary Jane and Gwen Stacy, and just all those relationships intertwined is what made Spider-Man and what kind of defined it at that time. So I thought that that's what John Romita really added to it, because he was at least mindful of the styles and whatever that young people were wearing and what young people were into. So he was adding that to the comic books, and I thought he did a really good job of it too. Like I said, it's very classic when you look at that like that. The classic version of Gwen Stacy or the first appearance of Mary Jane Watson, that's all John Romita's doing. Okay, he made the women look cute and sexy at the same time, and he defined that style to where people still love those characters even till today. And when I think of his artwork, whether it was not just Spider-Man but other projects that he's worked on, I can say that he truly left a legacy of I guess you could say traditionalism and hard work, and also kind of creating a classic world. Like when you look back on a lot of his work, you'll get happy just looking at it. Even when people do tributes to his stuff, it's almost kind of looking back in nostalgia. You see what I'm saying? So I think he did an amazing job with that. The only thing I can say, I can't really say anything in criticism of John Romita. The only thing I will say that maybe just with a criticism of the comic book industry in and of itself is, while John Romita died doing okay financially, he was doing just fine. He wasn't suffering. He wasn't broke. He should have been a multi-millionaire. Now, from what I understand, his net worth was about $5 million altogether. And I think that's from the fact that he worked on so many classic comic books and he was able to auction those pages, because a lot of the artwork that I found was through auction. So a lot of his work is out there through private sellers and auctions and stuff like that. So he was doing okay with that. But also there was a time where he was actually the editor-in-chief over at Marvel. So he was doing okay with that, to the point where even his son, everyone knows John Romita Jr., is also a very popular comic book artist in the industry and has almost reached his dad's level of fame and influence, really. I know a lot of people don't like John Romita Jr.'s style, but he'll always say, and I've talked to him before, he'll always say his style is basically called a deadline style. He was just always trying to finish his deadlines, and that was it. He wasn't trying to be great per se. He said he could never compare to the work that his father did. He was just trying to do a good job and be a hard-working artist like his father was. So I can understand that. So, but I think between his son probably did help him in still keeping relevant and whatnot, and also, like I said, through the auctions, being editor-in-chief, through having a personal relationship with people like Stan Lee. John Romita Sr. did okay financially, but when you think about all of his artwork that was done on Spider-Man and how his Spider-Man was basically the trademark for Marvel for the longest time, and all the Marvel licensing you can think of, whether it be, once again, I said, like toys, lunchboxes, underwear, clothing, t-shirts, amusement parks, advertisements on billboards. Whenever the Spider-Man was licensed for anything like smoking or Dare or whatever, John Romita Sr. should be a multi-millionaire based on just the licensing deals and royalty checks coming just from that. So if there's anything that you can learn from his life and legacy, and I understand he came from a different time where everyone was just thinking about, as far as like being a working artist, just being work for hire and getting a regular paycheck. Yeah, that's all to the good, but when you're creating something and you're defining a character and you're creating new characters go on top of that, you really need to think about, you know, as far as like getting a piece of the ownership to the point where you and your family are well off in the years to come, if you're going to be doing some sort of job like that. Now, it's a lot better now, but I know back then when he started, it was basically just work for hire, and he was hoping, you know, to get a regular gig so he can keep, you know, doing that and, you know, feeding his family. And that's how those guys worked back then. But, you know, as far as like ownership goes, it'd have been nice if he had a little bit more ownership. And you think about all the movies they're making with all these different characters and all the storylines that they're doing with these characters, he should be a multi-millionaire with the stuff that he created. You see, his grandchildren should want for nothing. His great-grandchildren should want for nothing based on all that he created that is being used by Marvel corporate. So that's all I want to impart to you so you guys can understand that. Once again, John Romita Sr. was not broke when he died, okay? And he wasn't suffering financially, but he could have been doing a lot better considering all that he created. And I want all of us to think about that as content creators, of what we could be creating and what we can have when we create certain content. And even if you do get involved with a major company, think about the ownership side and think about, you know, the content creation side, and make sure you get a piece of it for yourself. Even if it's a small piece, that can be a large amount of money at the end of your life. When your life is over and you want to pass something down to your kids, that could be a big chunk of change that you're passing down. You see what I'm saying? So think about those things when you think about John Romita Sr. and the things that he accomplished in his career. You folks can let me know how you feel about it. If you were a John Romita Sr. fan, if you're a fan of any of these comic book artists that I talked about who have passed on recently, and you know, you can talk about all the nostalgia. And if you like talking about nostalgic comics, make sure you check out my show here on YouTube called Chris Crazy House Presents Comics Crazy, where I do talk about nostalgic comics from when I was growing up, and I do reviews and an analysis on those comic books in there. So you guys can let me know how you feel about that in the comment section, and make sure you go ahead and like and subscribe to this channel. Anyway, Chris Crazy House signing out. Peace.